welcome back. I hope you got some rest because today we're going to go a little bit deeper. It is very important for us to face the story of our loved one's mode of death, okay? But before we do that, we're going to build some self-capacity. So imagine like us building a little container, okay? And before we do that, I actually want you to pause the video and I want you to go get a piece of white paper. It could be any paper, but get a piece of white paper and get some crayons or some pencils or a pen. So anything like that. Or you can, after you learn the activity, you can get more creative with it, okay? So, and then to be continued on that activity. So just get those things and then keep them by you. Okay, so first what we're going to do today, right now, is talk about how to build self-capacity. Building self-capacity is good for anything. It essentially, it gives us tools and it gives us a container to just face very difficult things. And so let's start with this. First of all, I do want you to actually get your journal and a pen, and I want you to write these down, okay? So the reason why we build self-capacity is it's a foundational practice to trauma containment. So trauma tends to be it is in the domain of chaos. Just kind of imagine it's like everywhere, right? And we want to contain it. We want to bring order to it. And so these techniques that we're going to talk about and practice together, they're going to help you start doing that, not just for grief, but for the rest of your life. Side note, these are all practices. They're not things that we get perfect at. I still have to remind myself to practice. I still get triggered. I still have emotions come up. I still have past things come up. And so I compassionately remind myself, okay, Alina, like what are some of these techniques that you need to focus on maybe for this next season or this day in order to help yourself create a little bit self-capacity and containment, okay? So the first emotional technique is compassion and mutual respect. Now, originally, I designed this program to be an intensive group where people will come in and share these stories with each other, specifically people who have all lost a loved one to suicide. And so part of this technique is to learn to be compassionate and mutually respect one another's stories. I'm going to teach you how this looks like in a group, and then I'm going to guide you in ways that you can do this if you don't have a group or if you don't have people, you can do this. So you can do this with yourself, okay? But, originally I meant for this to be practice in a place of where when your peers are sharing the mode of death of their loved one, that we all practice respect and compassion for each other's stories. And I suppose this is something we can all practice more for any stories, right? Not just the mode of traumatic death that our loved ones go through. All stories, right? So listening to a story and recognizing that we have thoughts, we have emotions, feelings, beliefs, judgments, prejudices, right? We have things that we've learned and things we don't know. And so as we hear people tell stories, we want to practice being aware that they're telling their story and also being aware that we've got all this information going on, okay? And practicing this, we want to recognize this information going on, recognize the story being told, and take deep belly or diaphragmatic breaths. This helps us stay regulated, and we will talk about this a little later. I will walk you through it. But diaphragmatic breaths help us stay regulated so that we can be aware of our own stuff that's going on here in the background, our mental activities, and then the information that is being presented to us through the story. Now, for those of you who do not have a group, or maybe you want to do this on your own, what I would recommend when we get into story time, that you find some stuffed animals, or maybe get your dog. I would say you can borrow mine, but you can't. And put them in front of you and tell them the story. And we will talk a little bit more about how to do that in a few moments. So the purpose of this emotional task is to build connection. So building connection is, well, it requires for us to share vulnerably in a regulated body, right? And it requires us to share honestly and truthfully, okay? So much of connection in creating links with other people has to do with us actually sharing the facts of what happened. So as you can imagine, that could be really hard when you talk about a mode of a suicide, death of a loved one, okay? So what I want you to do is take a few moments and just write down the first emotional technique is compassion and mutual respect. So practicing listening to our stories and the stories of the people around us, while being aware and open to our own mental activities, not judging them, just aware of them, and being open to listening to what the other person's presenting, okay? So the second emotional technique is learning to manage your emotions through diaphragmatic breaths and allowing them to flow freely. This is a hard thing to learn. I wish I could say I was a master. I am not. Sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's really hard, okay? So this technique will train you to become, hopefully over time, a master over your emotions without the fear of the emotion. First of all, it's a good reminder that emotions are data communicating to us that something is going on. It's good for us to name emotions and to ask what is the story that they're telling. Now, just because an emotion is telling a story does not mean that the story is true, but it does mean that the emotion that you're experiencing is real, okay? So, with that said, we want to, with our attention, become overseers over the flow of emotions that come in and out, okay? And learn to kind of direct the flow. What is this emotion saying? What is it communicating to me? What is it telling me? What is it reminding me? What is it bringing me back to, right? And then using skills and tools, or learning new skills and tools to, well, figure out what we want to do with these emotions, right? So a great key here is learning to be compassionate. A lot of times in practices like this, or when we're working through our own traumas, it's really easy to be frustrated with ourselves, right? Frustrated with, well, I know better, and I know this, and I know that. Why am I feeling this way? Well, sometimes our knowing, a lot of times our knowing and our feeling, they're disconnected. They're not aligned. And part of aligning them is we have to drop into the feeling, face what is going on, and then that naturally aligns it with the truth that we actually do know. This does take a lot of time, though. So you do want to learn to be patient with yourself, okay? This is not a work recommended for those in a rush. Most of you already know that. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about diaphragmatic breaths. The quickest way to regulate your nervous system is through your breath, okay? So the way that I like to breathe, I learned to do this with running, is I like to take 2 breaths in and 1 breath out. So like this. So I'll breathe in twice. I'll fill my belly. And then it's good to hold for a second and then release. And so you can also, there's so many of these practices on Google and YouTube. You can just Google these things, best breath work practices, right? But essentially what you need to know is that the quickest way to regulate your nervous system if it feels hijacked or triggered is through breath. So diaphragmic means that you're breathing into your diaphragm, into your belly. The way that I teach kids to do this, that is good for adults too, is imagine that there's a balloon in your belly and you want to blow up that balloon as much as you can, hold it, and then slowly release it. So for those of you, when you feel a little triggered, just pause and take deep belly breaths. You can also, to the belly breath, add maybe focusing on something that helps you stay calm, peaceful, something outside. I like to do this in the mornings on my balcony, looking at the mountains with my dog, my coffee, right? So this is a really great practice. It is a practice, and it's something that the more we do, the better we will get at, okay? So the third emotional technique is what we want to do is we want to, with our minds, imagine a connection to a loved one that you have now, that is current, right? That is healthy, that is secure, that you have an internal attachment to this loved one, okay? That you can kind of derive strength from this loved one. So when I think of a loved one that I derive strength from, I think of my mom. I think of my mom's presence. I think of her voice. I think of her love for me, right? And when I can take deep belly breaths and notice my mom, what it actually does is my attention on my mom, my mind focusing on my mom, right? It activates my neural circuit that has been created over time that is connected to my relationship with my mom, right? And so when this is activated, all of the feelings, the experiences, the emotions, the connections I've made with her over my life kind of like just activates in my body. I can sense them. I can sense her presence. I can sense her love. I can sense her peacefulness, right? So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause this video and take a moment and ask yourself, who is a loved one that I can activate inside of me who has been internalized inside of me, and who I can tap into their strength. Now, you want to focus on someone who you feel loved, peaceful, strong, or any positive emotions, right? This can be your parent. It can be your best friend. It can also be God. It can also be maybe a character that you have connected in a show you like to watch, that you feel strength from them, right? Or it could be someone in a book that you're reading. It could be your dog. It could be yourself in another time, but I would recommend take some people, right? And so what I want you to do is I want you to take your piece of white paper and I want you to draw this person, this character. And with that said, maybe draw several of them. Maybe you have a parent. Maybe you have a best friend. Maybe you have a faith. Maybe you have a character in the books that you really connect with. I want you to draw this on the piece of white paper. And I will tell you what we will do with that later. But as you draw these characters, what I want you to do is I want you to take deep belly breaths and imagine them actually next to you. Imagine them sitting with you. Imagine what they would say to you as you're going through this process. And maybe write down on the piece of white paper a message they have for you. And it could be as simple as, I got you, or you got this, or I'm so proud of you, or I'm excited for you, right? So, with that said, pause the video and take a few moments to do this. And after you're done, what we're going to do next is, if you're in a group, I want you to take deep belly breaths, and I want you to share the story of the way that your loved one died. Not their whole life story, just the mode of death. This is important. If you are not in a group, if you're by yourself, imagine, you can pause this video, you can put, the picture of your secure attachments that you drew next to this video, and imagine that you're telling it to me, if I was your guide or your therapist. And what I want you to do is take deep belly breaths and out loud share the story of the way that your loved one died. If this is too triggering, this is important. If this is too activating, I want you to put this to the side, take a deep belly breath, and say, I'm going to do this with another person, or I'm going to do this with a therapist, okay? That's important. It's important for us to be in a regulated, calm body when we do this. So with that said, if you even specifically have questions about this segment, don't hesitate and write to us, and in the future, maybe we can add or take away some things. With that in mind, we're going to end this segment. I want you to make sure that you rest. Go over your notes. Do not rush yourself. Practice these emotional techniques for containment, right? You may need to spend a couple of days practicing this before you tell the story of the mode of the way that your loved one died, right? So don't rush yourself. Rest, and I will see you in the next segment.